I can't seem to catch a break when it comes to the Denver Broncos. I had this dream offseason plan in mind, and one of my top free agent picks is already off the table. But hold on, there's actually a huge silver lining to all this, and trust me, it makes the bad news a bit easier to swallow. Let's dive into it. If you're new here, I'm a die-hard Denver Broncos fan, and if you're enjoying this content, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps me out. Now let's talk about the inside linebacker position. It's been clear that this is an area the Broncos really needed to upgrade. We were hoping for big things from Singleton as he recovers from injury, and there's some potential with Drew Sanders, but he hasn't been in that role long enough for us to know for sure. So, what were we hoping for? A former Sean Payton draft pick, someone who had already shown flashes of greatness. We all would have been thrilled if we could have added him to the roster. That guy was Zach Bond. The connections between him and the Broncos were all over the place, even during the playoffs after the Broncos were eliminated. Fans and analysts alike were buzzing about how perfect he would be for Denver. But just as we were getting our hopes up, the Philadelphia Eagles swooped in and made him an offer he couldn't refuse. He signed a massive contract worth $51 million over 3 years, including $17 million this year. So just like that, Zach Bond is no longer an option for the Broncos. But here's the silver lining. Are we really that upset? Sure, Bond is a talented player, and it would have been awesome to see him in Denver. But when you take a step back and think about it, a big part of his success came from playing behind one of the best defensive lines in football. We saw how that defensive line was able to pressure quarterbacks, including Patrick Mahomes, with just 4 rushers. So we have to ask ourselves, how much of Bond's production was a result of the outstanding defensive front he played behind? He definitely had some highlight reel moments like the strips and his pick off Mahomes, but when you think about it, does that make him the best linebacker in the world? Is he really worth the kind of money he just signed for? More than any linebacker in the league? It's a lot to consider. Stay tuned because there's more good news to come. This isn't over yet. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. Do you think it would have been an overpay for the Broncos to dish out $17 million for Zach Bond? Was a lot of his success really just due to the incredible defensive line in front of him? Let me know what you think. Now here's where things get interesting. The silver lining is that there are still plenty of options out there for Sean Payton and the Broncos to pursue. We recently heard Adam Schefter mention on a podcast that the San Francisco 49ers are in a really tough spot financially. They've got huge cap issues, and with rumors swirling about moving Deebo Samuel and only getting a 5th-round pick in return, they have to find a way to make room for Brock Purdy's contract. Their roster is also one of the oldest in the league, and because of all this, Schefter confirmed that linebacker Dre Greenlaw will likely be on his way out. Looking at his PFF grades, Greenlaw has been nearly as effective as Zach Bond this season. Historically, Greenlaw has outperformed Bond by a good margin, even though injuries have slowed him down a bit. Most notably, he tore his Achilles. But if you look at prime Dre Greenlaw, you could make the case that he was one of the top linebackers in the league. He brings a certain intensity, sets the tone, and is a game changer on the field. If we could bring him to Denver, he'd be a perfect tone setter for our defense at inside linebacker. Plus, Greenlaw hasn't played behind as strong a defensive front as the one the Broncos could offer. He's shown he can make plays in space, whether it's sacking the quarterback or making key tackles in coverage. I really believe the 49ers could have beaten the Chiefs in that Super Bowl if Greenlaw hadn't gotten hurt with the Achilles injury. So here's the great news. If the Broncos do land a guy like Dre Greenlaw, or as Schefter mentioned in the same podcast, the game-changing safety Jimmy Ward could also be available on the free agent market. That would be huge for the Broncos' defense. Another name that's been brought up a lot is Nick Bolton, who has definitely been a solid performer for the Chiefs. But I have a bad feeling that the Chiefs will keep Bolton, as he's one of their key players. In other news today, the Kansas City Chiefs made a move that shocked a lot of people. They traded away their Pro Bowl guard, the same one they just franchise tagged. And I remember saying that it was a bad decision to franchise tag him in the first place, paying him like he's a left tackle when he's actually just a guard. Well, now they've traded him away, which means they won't have to pay that hefty salary. And in return, they got only a 4th-round draft pick from the Chicago Bears. To me, that's a huge win for the Bears. Imagine how upset we'd be if Quinn Miners got traded for just a 4th-round pick. He's one of the best guards in the league. The Chiefs clearly saw this guy as a key piece, so for them to trade him away for that low price is great news for us. It's becoming clear that the Chiefs are entering a bit of a rebuild. I even texted my friend, a Chiefs fan, and he told me it feels like they're starting from scratch. If you look at their defensive line, it's clear they struggled to keep Patrick Mahomes protected, even with the Philadelphia Eagles only rushing 4 players. Now, they've lost one of their top guards, which only makes their O-line situation worse. For the Broncos, this is fantastic news. Imagine Zach Allen going up against whoever the Chiefs plug in at guard now. Are they really going to throw a rookie into the mix? Good luck with that. The Chiefs are already stretched thin with the contracts they've given to Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes, and Chris Jones, so this move shows they're having to make tough choices. The more they struggle, the better it is for the Broncos. But here's where the real silver lining comes in. The Broncos are likely going to add a big-name wide receiver this offseason. Mike Kliss, a reliable insider, recently suggested that the Broncos are targeting a receiver of note, meaning a top-tier player, not just a low-risk signing like Josh Reynolds last year. One name that keeps popping up is Devonta Smith, and then there's DK Metcalf, who reportedly wants out of Seattle. Personally, I love seeing the Seahawks crumble after the whole Russell Wilson saga. It's about time they face the consequences, especially after they beat us in that Super Bowl. But the most exciting piece of news? The sportsbook Bovada has listed the Broncos as the favorites to land Garrett Wilson, a young receiver who was drafted 10th overall just a couple of years ago. He's been impressive despite playing with some mediocre quarterbacks in New York. Vegas doesn't make these kinds of predictions unless they're confident, so the fact that the Broncos are leading the pack is huge. If the Broncos are serious about adding a receiver of note, Garrett Wilson is exactly the type of player they need. If I had to choose between paying for a linebacker like Zach Bond, who might be benefiting from a great defensive line, or going for a game-changing wide receiver like Wilson, I'd go with the receiver any day. Let me know in the comments which wide receiver you're most excited about. I posted a poll on my channel, and it looks like most people are hyped about Chris Godwin. But with so many teams vying for these top-tier receivers, it's going to be an exciting race to watch unfold. And finally, here's a bit of sad news for the Houston Texans. Tank Dell, who was a key weapon for them last season, has been dealing with a knee injury that he didn't get surgery on until just recently. Because of that, he's likely out for the entire next season. When Tank Dell was healthy, the Texans' offense had a lot more firepower, so now they're going to be in the market for a new wide receiver to fill that void. Big news coming out of Kansas City today. The Chiefs just made a major move that is sure to have a big impact. They traded away their Pro Bowl guard, the guy they just franchise tagged. I had already said that tagging him was a bad move, paying him like he's a left tackle when he's actually a guard. Now the Chiefs have traded him away, and all they got in return was a 4th-round pick from the Chicago Bears. Honestly, this feels like a huge steal for the Bears. Can you imagine how upset we'd be if Quinn Miners was traded for just a 4th-round pick? He's one of the best guards in the league. The Chiefs obviously thought highly of this guy, so this is great news for us as Broncos fans. It's clear that the Chiefs are starting a rebuild. I texted a friend of mine who's a Chiefs fan, and he said it feels like a rebuild. Looking at their defensive line, it's evident that they had trouble keeping Patrick Mahomes protected, even with just the Eagles rushing 4. And now, taking away one of their Pro Bowl guards, this is great for us. You've got Zach Allen now going up against a team that's already struggling on the O-line. Are they going to throw a rookie in there to fill the gap? Good luck with that. The Chiefs are already up against the cap with big contracts for Travis Kelce, Mahomes, and Chris Jones. It's hard to see them coming out of this situation without making more moves that could work in our favor. But here's the real silver lining. The Broncos are looking to add a significant weapon this offseason. Mike Kliss recently put out a column suggesting that the Broncos are likely to bring in a receiver of note. No more of those low-profile signings like Josh Reynolds last year. We're talking about a true number. 1 caliber receiver. One name that's been floated is Devonta Smith, and then there's DK Metcalf, who reportedly asked for a trade from Seattle. Honestly, I love seeing the Seahawks unravel after their whole Russell Wilson situation. It's great seeing them struggle, especially after they beat us in the Super Bowl. But the big surprise, according to the sportsbook Bovada, the Broncos are now the favorites to land Garrett Wilson, the 10th overall pick in the draft just a couple of years ago. This guy has put up great numbers despite playing with less than ideal quarterback play. Vegas doesn't lose money, So the fact that they have the Broncos as the front runner says a lot. If the Broncos are truly looking for a receiver of note, Garrett Wilson fits that bill perfectly. If I had to choose between paying for a linebacker like Zach Bond, who may have been benefiting from a great defensive line, or a game-changing wide receiver like Wilson, I'd definitely go with the wide receiver. Let me know in the comments which wide receiver you're most excited about. I put up a poll on my channel, and most people voted for Chris Godwin as the player they're most hyped for. But there will be a lot of teams trying to grab these top receivers, so it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. Oh, and one last piece of news. Sadly for the Houston Texans, things aren't looking great. Tank Dell, who was a key player for them last season, has been dealing with a knee injury that he didn't get surgery on until this week. This means he's likely out for the entire next season. The Texans' offense was much more explosive when Dell was healthy, so now they'll be on the lookout for another wide receiver to fill the gap. As the Broncos prepare to compete for a playoff spot, it's great news that the Texans will be without Tank Dell this season. But here's the thing, this also means the race for top wide receivers is going to be intense. Not just the Broncos, but the Raiders, Chargers, Chiefs, and Texans all need a number one receiver. It's a full-on battle to land one of these players, and it's going to be a highly competitive offseason. With all these teams fighting for the same talent, the Broncos have a major edge. You've got Sean Payton at the helm, a franchise with 300 days of sunshine and one of the richest owners in sports. We've got to be sending that message loud and clear. There's no place like Denver, and if you want to play in a city that's on the rise, this is the spot for you. Another silver lining here is the growing possibility of adding some big names to the roster. Players like Hwanga and Dre Greenlaw are reportedly on the block, and if either of those players ends up in Denver, it would be a huge win for us. In fact, if that was the only move we made this offseason, adding either Tonga or Greenlaw, we could still call this offseason a success. The Broncos are already in the playoffs, and with a solid draft, another year of development for players like Bo Nix and Devin V, we could make a significant leap. Instead of just making the playoffs, we could become a true late playoff contender, and that's exciting. So, it's a great time to be covering the Broncos, and hope is definitely alive. Broncos country, we're back, and it's going to be an exciting ride.